Hello, this is Zion Crime Factory. In this episode I will be discussing the ongoing Jewish war against Gentiles. This war is not a new one by any means. It has been going on for thousands of years and continues even today. What people fail to understand is that Zionism is simply the latest manifestation of the Jewish war against Gentiles. It is per Judaic commandment to conquer and destroy all Gentile nations on earth. They plan to do this using the divide and conquer strategy, as they always have, through proxy wars, pitting Gentiles against one another. As the former president of Malaysia, Mahathir Mohamad, said, the Jews rule the world by proxy. They get others to fight and die for them. One of the first examples of this, of course, is when the Jewish Sanhedrin manipulated the Romans into killing Jesus. Religion plays right into this because it can be used to divide populations into larger and larger camps, and then when poisoned against one another, all that is needed is a spark and they will be at each other's throats like wild animals. Christians and Muslims were duped into slaughtering each other for countless centuries in this way. This is why I am no fan of religion, any religion, because I believe it instills servitude in people and stunts their ability to think clearly and critically, and it can be used to manipulate people into doing some very idiotic things. Jews don't fight their own battles unless against an unarmed, defenseless people like the Palestinians, as is the way of the coward. They've always taken pride in manipulating others into doing the dirty work. Propaganda is their greatest weapon. That's why in every country they gain a foothold. Jews immediately monopolize the mass media and use it as a tool of deceit and seduction against the Gentile host. We see this today in glaring clarity in America. The Jews have taken full control of the United States, economically, politically, media-wise, and are using it as a proxy force to destroy the enemies of Israel in the Middle East. Prior to this American empire that we see today, laying waste to foreign lands for profit, the Jews were using the British Empire to do the dirty work under the rulership of the Rothschild family. And after that, it was the Soviet Empire wreaking all kinds of havoc under the rulership of Jewish Bolshevism. We see this time and time again. It's the same pattern over and over again. Parasite clings to host. The host becomes an outward reflection of the internal problem. Take the following quotes as an example of what I'm talking about. Quote, thanks to the terrible power of our international banks, we have forced the Christians into wars without number. Wars have a special value for Jews since Christians massacre each other and make more room for us Jews. Wars are the Jews' harvest. The Jew banks grow fat on Christian wars. Over 100 million Christians have been swept off the face of the earth by wars, and the end is not yet, unquote. Rabbi Reichhorn in Le Contemporain, 1880. Quote, corral the 50 wealthiest Jews and there will be no wars, unquote. Henry Ford. Quote, if my sons did not want wars, there would be none, unquote. Guido Schnapper, Mayor Amschel Rothschild's wife on her deathbed, 1849. Quote, we have been at the bottom not merely of the latest great war, but nearly all your wars, not only of the Russian, but of every other major revolution in your history. We do it solely with the irresistible might of our spirit, with ideas and propaganda, unquote. A real case against the Jews. Marcus Ellie Ravage, The Century Magazine, January 1928. You see, Jews are small in number, tiny in number. They cannot possibly accomplish their goals without puppeteering Gentile groups into carrying out specific agendas for them, while they sit back in their million-dollar yachts counting their shekels. This is the way they've been waging war against Gentiles for thousands of years, covertly through infiltration and subversion, by means of propaganda and usury, psychological and economic enslavement. The Holocaust industry is a perfect example of the psychological subversion they subject their Gentile hosts to. The Federal Reserve fractional banking system is a perfect example of the economic subversion and enslavement they subject their Gentile hosts to as well. 19. One of the ways Jews wage this war against us is by perpetuating various ideologies, political ideologies in particular. They use ideologies to brainwash hordes of non-Jews into supporting Jewish interests. Socialism and communism was invented by the Jews Moses Hess and Karl Marx, and was used by Jewish populations to take over Gentile nations, establish central control, pillage, plunder, and enslave the host populace under the rule of Talmudic law. Those who resisted were exterminated or sent to the gulags to work slave labor until they died of exhaustion. Soviet Russia was essentially the first Zionist state. Nearly all of the top communist killers and criminals in Russia and Eastern Europe, including Trotsky, Lenin, Zinoviev, Kamenev, Sverdlov, Kaganovich, Genrikh Yagoda, Uritsky, Yurovsky, Alexander Pavlis, Bela Kun, Tibor Zamuli, Anna Pauker, Jacob Berman, Matyash Rakoshi, Rudolf Slansky, and others were Jews. For nearly a century, the Jewish Marxists ruled Russia with an iron fist and ruthlessly murdered white Christians to the tune of at least 40 million when it was all said and done. That is the reality of Jewish rule. Once they establish complete central control of the state, they hunt and kill Gentiles like sitting ducks. The Palestinians are the latest victims of this type of despotic Jewish rule, and they will do it to anyone who stands up to them. Now, I don't want to get too much into communism, but all the facts and realities about Jewish Bolshevism can be found in several books, two of which are Behind Communism by Frank L. Britton and Under the Sign of the Scorpion by Yuri Lina, which I highly recommend you take the time to read. What I wanted to do, though, is tie this concept of Jewish ideological subversion into the situation today with the United States, 9/11, and the so-called War on Terror. You see, Bolshevism never ended with the death of Trotsky, whose real name was Lev Bronstein. Some of his loyal disciples crossed over from Marxism to Zionism and formulated a new movement called neoconservatism, yet another ideology to manipulate American Goyim into doing the Jews' bidding. Neoconservatism was invented by several Jewish Trotskyites named Irving Kristol, Norman Podhoretz, and Leo Strauss. The reason they did this was because they knew the American people would never accept communism, and ever since the establishment of Israel in 1948, they saw that the left was not supporting Israel, with the Soviet Union taking up the Arab alliance, so they decided to infiltrate the right-wing conservative circles of America to gain control of the Republican Party and force the American government to adopt policies strongly in favor of the State of Israel. Irving Kristol, the founder of this wretched movement, basically admitted that the goal of the neocons was to boost U.S. military budgets in the hopes of using the United States military as a proxy force to arm and defend Israel against her Arab enemies, which is precisely what has happened. In his neocon theory, the megalomaniac Leo Strauss advocated the concept of the noble lie, or in other words, deliberately misleading the public about certain things for a greater good. This so-called greater good that he spoke of is what was good for the Jews, not the Gentiles among whom they live. These clever rats have systematically implemented their treacherous will on America. Irving Kristol is the father of William Kristol, the founder of the Project for a New American Century group, which cooked up all the pre-invasion Iraq weapons of mass destruction lies, and in one of its documents called Rebuilding America's Defenses, stated that their goals of Mideast destruction and boosting U.S. military spending would not likely fly with the American people, save some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. They got that new Pearl Harbor a year later on 9/11. The neocons in America are the spitting image of the Bolshevists in Russia, in the sense that most of them are Jewish, with some corrupted Gentile lapdogs and war profiteers who have come along for the ride. The genocidal PNAC group, headed and run by the two Jewish criminal personalities William Kristol and Robert Kagan, was an offshoot of an earlier Israeli group called the IASPS, or the Israeli Institute for Advanced Strategic and Political Studies. This psychotic group of Zionist warmongers wrote a paper for then Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, called A Clean Break, a New Strategy for Securing the Realm, in which they advocated overthrowing the Iraqi, Iranian, and Syrian regimes and the cutting of all peace talks with Palestinians, among other horrid things. This paper was written in 1996 by the Zionist Jews Richard Perle, Douglas Feith, and David Wurmser. All three men later became prominent members of the Bush administration in the Pentagon and joined their co-religionist Paul Wolfowitz in leading the warmongering against Iraq and Saddam Hussein on behalf of Israel. There was at least 31 Zionist Jews in top-level positions of the Bush administration, including Richard Perle, Douglas Feith, Dov Zakheim, Paul Wolfowitz, Michael Chertoff, Mark Grossman, David Frum, Louis Libby, Henry Kissinger, James Celsinger, Joshua Bolten, Elliot Abrams, Elliot Cohen, Ari Fleischer, among others. Splinter neocon think tanks associated with the Bush administration were also set up, run, and operated by hawkish pro-Israel Jews and their Gentile lapdogs, like the American Enterprise Institute, the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs, the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, among other traitors backstabbing organizations. The Jews also led the cheer for war in Iraq and Afghanistan on part of the media, with such Jewish neocon criminal personalities as Max Boot, William Safire, William Kristol, Robert Kagan, Alan Dershowitz, Charles Krautheimer, Daniel Pipes, Elliot Cohen, Joshua Bolten, David Frum, John Podhoretz, Norman Podhoretz, David Wurmser, Meyrav Wurmser, Michael Ledeen, John Bolton, Stephen Bryan, Martin Indyk, and others. They are the octopus of the Jewish criminal network, which has taken full control of the United States and British foreign policy and the mass media of most Western nations. Now, it's blatantly obvious that the Iraq War was a Jewish war led by Jewish motivations and for Jewish gain, and knowing this fact, it becomes quite predictable that the event, the so-called New Pearl Harbor, that provided these rat-faced criminals with the excuse they needed to launch their genocidal wars in the Middle East, that event being 9/11, was engineered by the very same people. The abundance of evidence proving that these Jewish Zionist criminals were fully behind 9/11 was apparent within hours of the 9/11 event, as the first people arrested in connection to the attacks was 3 groups of Israeli Mossad officers. Firstly, 9/11 follows a pattern of Israeli false flag operations, starting with the King David Hotel bombing in 1946, the Lavon Affair in 1954, the USS Liberty attack in 1967, among numerous other Israeli false flag operations designed to dupe Western forces into attacking Israel's Arab Muslim enemies and fight yet more proxy wars on behalf of the racist, supremacist Jewish power elite. Now, I don't want to get too much into 9/11 here because there's just so much evidence in favor of my position that it would literally take me hours to recite it all back to you. For those who are unfamiliar with the evidence, I put together a document called Israel Did 9/11, All the Proof in the World, thoroughly proving that the Mossad and the broader Jewish criminal network carried out the attacks, covered it up, and then used their controlled media to pin the crime on a bunch of ragtag Arab amateurs with box cutters, which is laughable at best. It can be read at theinformationunderground.com, or I'm sure you can find it on plenty of other websites by just typing the title into Google. I also highly recommend checking out the documentary 9/11 Missing Links, which covers much of the same material as my piece and goes even more in depth. For a collection of most of my works, you can go to jewishcrimenetwork.blogspot.com,
where I have the videos and audios that I've made laid out all nice and neatly for you to view and pass along to your friends. Thanks for listening.